What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we're going to be comparing the Samsung Galaxy S20 FE to the Samsung Galaxy A71. And I think this is a really interesting comparison because basically what we have here is Samsung's highest end A series device for 2020 up against the sort of low end or entry level flagship S series phone. And it'll be interesting to see what kinds of differences there are in going with one phone over another. First off, let's start with pricing and availability. And with this, I do need to explain a couple of things. The S20 FE is pretty simple. There's basically just one version of this phone here in the US. It's the S20 FE 5G, and in general, this device's full retail price is $699. But right now, there are some deals and holiday discounts going on that bump the price down to $599, and I've even seen it as low as $550 too. The A71, on the other hand, is a little more complicated. There are technically a few versions of this phone. There's this standard A71 that came out back in January. It's available all around the world, and unlocked, you can pick this phone up now for around $350, which is a pretty good price. But here in the US, there's also an A71 5G. It's a newer phone, a bit more powerful. It's sold both unlocked and through carriers like AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon, and it is quite a bit more expensive. It's listed at most places for $599, but unlocked on Amazon, I've seen it as low as $499, and right now Samsung actually has some deals of their own going on too. The main difference between the original A71 and the A71 5G, aside from 5G support obviously, is a slight bump up in internal specs, the processor and the RAM. That's it. 95% of the rest of the phone is the same, and if you had an A71 like I have here and an A71 5G in your hands, you probably couldn't tell them apart. If you want my honest opinion between the S20 FE and the A71 5G, the S20 is the way better value for the price. On the other hand, I still think the original A71 for $350 is a crazy good deal on its own. So those are my thoughts on the prices. Sorry if that was a little confusing, but if you guys are interested in doing some comparison shopping of your own or want to check out some of the deals I mentioned, I'll leave some links down below in the video description. But let's go ahead and check out everything else going on with these two phones. Like I said, the A71 and A71 5G are essentially identical physically, so I'm just going to use my regular A71 for this comparison since it's all going to be the same. But side by side, you can see that both the S20 FE and A71 look pretty similar too. They are both very obviously 2020 flagship devices, so they rock a fresh modern design with super slim bezels and a hole punch camera cutout up top. Size-wise, interestingly enough, it's the A71 that's the bigger device. It comes in at 6.7 inches, while the S20 FE is a 6.5 inch phone. Though the difference is mainly in height, the A71 is just a little taller, both phones are about the same width, and really either way you go, you're ending up with a huge device in your hand. These are two of the biggest phones Samsung offers just in general, and for the price, it's great getting such a huge display to view content. Just know that both of these phones are a bit of a stretch with one-handed use, and might not be the right fit for everyone. With design and housing, things are pretty similar here too, just kind of with different approaches. The rear panel on both phones is plastic. The A71 has that glossy, shiny finish with a rainbow effect and some subtle designs, while the S20 FE obviously has a flat matte finish, but no matter how you look at it, it is all plastic, and you can feel that in your hand with both phones. The sides and edges are also sort of similar too. They're a polished chrome finish, just with a slightly different shade of teal. And actually, the S20 FE here is the thicker device by just a little bit. You might be able to barely see that on camera, but in the hand, you can certainly tell the difference. While the materials on the phones are pretty much the same, there are some differences in features. For example, the S20 FE has a full array of extras. It's IP68 water and dust resistant, it offers wireless charging, and it has Samsung's reverse wireless charging power share feature too, while no versions of the A71 offer any of those features. So you might have to decide if any of that stuff is important to you. Taking a look around at everything else on On the left side is where the A71's SIM and SD card tray is located, while on the S20 FE, it's at the top of the phone. On the right side, both devices have identical power and volume buttons. Down below, there's the same USB-C charger and downward firing speaker, but you'll notice on the A71, it does retain the headphone jack. Conversely, the S20 FE has an additional speaker in the earpiece for a stereo sound listening experience, while the A71 does not. And here's a quick sound sample so you can hear the difference. Around back, these two phones have very different camera setups, which I'll go more in depth with in just a bit. And up front, underneath the displays, they both also have in-display fingerprint readers. With this, the placement is nearly the same, but the speed and accuracy I think is often better on the S20 FE. And this is something I've just always felt. The A71 tends to be a little slower and a little more inconsistent, while the S20 FE is very much a flagship sort of sensor setup. Both phones also have face unlock as well, and with this, again, to me, the S20 FE almost always unlocks and jumps to the home screen faster than the A71, though the difference is pretty small. When it comes to the displays, these two phones actually do share a lot in common here. While the sizes, like I mentioned, are a little different, the resolutions are the same. They are both 2400 by 1080 panels, but the A71 packs in 393 pixels per inch, while the S20 FE's pixel density is around 407 pixels per inch. They're also both Super AMOLED panels as well, and to me, just sort of glancing at regular old content, the color and overall viewing experience looks nearly identical with the vast majority of the stuff you'd want to watch. The S20 FE's display is maybe a little brighter. I also think the white balance is a bit better, which you might be able to tell when the white and gray settings page pops up here in just a second. But all in all, either way you go with these two phones, you're getting a fantastic viewing experience for the price. The difference, though, has less to do with the visuals and more to do with the user experience. The S20 FE, as you guys know, offers a 120Hz high refresh rate mode. This is a feature not offered on any of the A71 devices, and in a sense, this basically just makes the S20 FE feel fast, responsive, and that much more snappy with every tap, touch, and swipe. A high refresh rate screen isn't something everyone values at this point, I know, but I think for this phone in particular, it is a great addition, and it's something not a lot of other devices offer just in general right now. So in my opinion, it's probably one of the standout features in particular for the S20 FE. So in regards to the specs, I want to take some time to explain everything I can, because if maybe you're shopping for the A71 and A71 5G, I think it's important to highlight those differences too. But first, we'll start with the S20 FE, and this is pretty simple. This phone packs 2020 flagship specs. It's got the Snapdragon 865 chipset, 6 or 8 gigs of RAM, and 128 or 256 gigabytes of storage with that SD card expansion. My regular A71 here is powered by the slightly less powerful Snapdragon 730 chipset, the same 6 or 8 gig of RAM options, and 128 gigs of storage with SD card support. Now, if you're jumping to the A71 5G, the difference there is going to be in the processor. That phone gets the Snapdragon 765G chipset and just one configuration option, 8 gigs of RAM with 128 gigs of storage. So hopefully you're still with me at this point. To make things easy, I'll just put it like this. The S20 FE has a flagship Snapdragon 800 series chipset, while any version of the A71 you get is going to have the slightly less powerful Snapdragon 700 series chipset. That's essentially what we're comparing here more than anything else. And to be totally honest, while yes, the S20 FE is going to be the faster, more powerful phone, the difference maybe isn't as extreme as you might expect. In just everyday everyday use with launching and loading default apps, the S20 FE definitely gets there first. But the difference is just a matter of a fraction of a second, if that. You don't get to see really anything noticeable until you jump over to some third-party apps and more graphics-heavy games. Here, you might save an extra couple seconds of load time going with the S20 FE over any version of the A71, and that may or may not be important to you, but let me just say this. The standard version of the A71, the one I have here, the $350 one, this phone is easily keeping up with the much more expensive S20 FE, and that's why I consider it to be such a good value, even still. The A71 5G, which is only a little bit better than my A71 is here, is considerably more expensive. It's almost the same price as the S20 FE in some instances, and that's why I still don't think the A71 5G is all that good of a value in comparison. Like I said at the start of this video, if it's between the regular A71 and the S20 FE, the regular A71 is the better value based on performance and price. But between the S20 FE and A71 5G model, it makes way more sense to perhaps spend a little more money, or maybe even the same amount of money, and just go with the S20 FE instead. Also, inside these phones is the exact same battery. The S20 FE and A71 both pack 4,500 milliamp capacity batteries inside. And for as long as I've used both of these phones, I haven't really found much of a difference at all in longevity. They both easily last a full day's use, but one thing that is worth noting, inside the package, Samsung sort of cheaped out and gives you a small, old, slow power brick with the S20 FE, even though the phone supports faster charging, while the A71 gets the faster USB-C charger in the box. So that's a little weird. Finally, when it comes to cameras, we are dealing with some pretty big differences here too, actually, and there are quite a number of things to consider. First off, the S20 FE has a triple lens setup around back, consisting of a 12 megapixel main lens, 8 megapixel telephoto lens, and 12 megapixel ultra-wide, paired with a 32 megapixel selfie camera up front. And you might not be able to tell just from the specs, but this is very much a 2020 flagship camera setup. It's essentially the same as what we got on the flagship S20 earlier in the year. The A71, on the other hand, offers a quad lens camera setup made up of a 64 megapixel main lens, a similar 12 megapixel ultra wide, but a 5 megapixel macro lens and 5 megapixel depth sensor paired with a similar 32 megapixel selfie camera up front. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, so let me break it down one lens at a time. With the main lenses on these phones, the A71 offers an additional feature where you can shoot a high detail 64 megapixel shot, and that's great. That's not something offered on the S20 FE. The ultra wide lenses are basically the same on both phones like I mentioned, but the S20 FE has a fairly useful telephoto lens, which not only allows for much sharper 2, 3, and 5 times zooms, for example, but up to 30 times total zoom. Certainly not something the A71 can do at all. The A71 has a macro lens for super close-up pictures, but I personally don't find that too useful. And the A71 also has a depth sensor to help with portrait shots, but that's not necessarily a positive addition because the S20 FE simply doesn't need that assistance. Capability-wise, you've got all the same stuff, even 4K video recording on both phones, and the rest of Samsung's suite of options. But in real-world use, the S20 FE is almost always going to take the better pictures in a vast majority of conditions. The bottom line is that we are basically comparing a flagship camera setup on the S20 FE to an upper mid-range setup on the A71, and fortunately, the difference isn't too drastic really, but it is still present, and it's expected. Getting the flagship camera setup on the S20 FE is just a huge plus for this phone, but honestly, there's still nothing wrong with the A71, and Samsung has done a fantastic job, especially this year, improving those camera capabilities on their A-series phones. So let me try and sum this all up one more time in the simplest way that I can. I personally consider the S20 FE to be a stellar value for the money. For all intents and purposes, It's a flagship S series phone, just at a much cheaper price, and it has all the specs and features to back that up. The regular A71, the $350 one that I have here, even though it's almost a year old now, I still think it's a great value. It's not that far off from the S20 FE, all things considered, but you can save a ton of money by going with it. The A71 5G, however, I still don't think is as good of a value when you consider the price on that phone versus what you get for almost the same price on the S20 FE. Between those two phones, I'm definitely going to prefer the S20 FE almost every single time. But what do you guys think about these phones? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.